lot of people are wondering, is this the right time to build a PC? And the answer you'll see from a lot of people online is no, you have to wait. And I think that's good advice for some people, but not for everybody. And so what is all of this getting into? Well, basically with new graphics cards coming out towards the end of this year and new CPUs coming out, well, in the next couple of months, a lot of people are thinking, well, you can get the latest and greatest thing soon. And that's true, but not every price point is going to be affected, as much as other points. So here's what I'm getting at. If you want to build some kind of, 4K high refresh rate gaming PC, probably wait for the next generation of GPUs and just realize your budget's going to be crazy big. If you want to build a solid 1080p gaming system, I actually don't think that waiting is going to do a whole heck of a lot for you. Let me pop in to PC Part Picker as a place where we can throw together a build, and I'll talk through the important building decisions as well as why I think this particular build makes sense and this price bracket makes sense in the current market. So let me get out of the way here. When we're thinking about this, the two most important parts of a gaming PC are the CPU and the GPU, also called the video card. And between the two, the video card is the more important one for most people in most situations. Now, one reason why there's a lot of disagreement here is different people play games different ways. If you tend to play games with high graphics settings, then your video card tends to be the limiting factor on the performance. And that's going to be most people, I think, especially if you're playing single-player games. Whereas people who are into primarily doing extremely competitive multiplayer, they'll turn down their graphics settings, which makes it easier for the video card. And then sometimes your CPU and the RAM that it's comboed with, the memory, become the limiting factor. So here's what I'm getting at. If you're building kind of a $800 or so build, we'll target somewhere around $700 or $800, and we're going to target solid 1080p gaming performance. I think a lot of people, if you're waiting for the newer CPUs, yes, they'll be faster gaming CPUs, but they're also going to be a lot more expensive than what you can get right now, and you won't see any actual performance benefit from those new CPUs compared to these older, cheaper ones if you're GPU limited. And since GPUs tend to be very expensive, and I think many people aren't going to be turning down graphics settings to become CPU limited, I really think this build can still make sense. So let me put it this way. If you go with something like a 6-core gaming CPU from either Intel or AMD, the current best value offering from Intel tends to be the 12400F. Now, all the F means is that it doesn't have the built-in GPU. Now, that built-in GPU is not going to be good for much other than plugging in a monitor to get the display up and running, which can be really useful if something's going wrong with your graphics card or something like that. But if you're actually playing games, you're not really going to need it, and that does cost you an extra $20 usually. And a fairly equivalent, although not exactly equivalent performance-wise CPU from AMD is the Ryzen 5 5600. Now, this lineup can be confusing. The 5600G seems like it would be the best deal here at $132. But the main reason somebody would buy the G version is it has actually a pretty good integrated graphics that you could use for very low-end gaming without a discrete graphics card, without a separate graphics card. However, as an actual CPU, this is much weaker. So if we're going to be pairing it with a good gaming GPU, you do not want to buy the G version. Whereas the 5600 and the 5600X, the 5600X is very, very slightly faster, but the difference is so small that the price difference here, in my opinion, does not make any sense to go for the 5600X. Now, I'm going to go with this 5600 because it's noticeably cheaper than that 12400F from Intel. Both are good choices, and then you'd also need to factor in the motherboard pricing. But I think at the prices I'm seeing as I'm putting together this build, this Ryzen 5 5600 makes the most sense. Also, one advantage of going with the lower end 6-core model here from both AMD and Intel is that it comes with a CPU cooler in the box. The CPU cooler isn't great, but it'll run the CPU just fine. It might be a little hotter and a little noisier than some people would want, so you could spend $20 to $40 on a separate CPU cooler. But in my opinion, if you're budget limited, that extra $20 to $40 being spent on the video card or something more impactful to gaming performance might be a better idea. And you could always get a better CPU cooler in the future if you end up being unhappy with maybe the noise the fans are making or something like that. So I'm going to save some money on this budget by leaving the CPU cooler as an optional add-in for your personal preference. It's not required, since the CPU will come with a cooler. Now, when you pick a CPU, you have to get a compatible motherboard. One nice thing about PC Part Picker, I'm not sponsored by them in any way, by the way, is that once you've locked in the CPU, it's only going to show you motherboards that are compatible with that. For this CPU, we need an AM4 socket, and there's a lot of options. You could sort price low to high, but it's going to be crazy. AMD has supported this socket for so long, there's a lot of options. So one thing we can do is limit which ones we're looking at. The A320 and 520, that 20 series tend to be the lowest end, and there's some drawbacks. You could get them in an absolute pinch. The B350 is old. The B450 is older. B550 is the newest generation. And then when you go up to the 70 class, those are kind of the higher end. There's some advantages to them. In general, I think a B550 is going to be a good choice. If you go with one of the older 350s or 450s, or even the 70 classes, but one of the older generations, you're going to want to make sure that they support BIOS flashing without a CPU installed, because those older generation ones might not support the 5000 series CPUs out of the box. So here we're looking at B550s. Most of these will support the CPU we've chosen out of the box. Some of them could possibly still need a BIOS flash, but that's a lot less likely. Now, you can look at things like the ratings, how many memory slots they support. The price is a big one. And so I'm not going to go with the absolute lowest end here. Now, to be honest, most of them will at least work, and you can save some money here. Some of them would have trouble with the VRMs staying cool on the absolute cheapest ones, especially if you put in a higher end CPU in the future, something like that. But there's a lot of decent ones here. Like I think this MSI B550A Pro would probably be fine. I'm not a huge fan of the cheapest ASRock boards. You can definitely save money there if you're comfortable doing that. I'm going to go ahead and slot in a definitely still lower end on the budget side. Like you could spend a lot more, but this has a lot of 5-star reviews. Supports up to 4 RAM slots. It has Wi-Fi. Like I said, a lot of good reviews. So I'm going to go with this B550M Pro VDH Wi-Fi. But keep in mind, like I said, you could certainly have put in one of those lower end motherboards if you wanted to save some money and take some of the compromises. This has the built-in Wi-Fi that some people would be wanting, as well as just being a pretty solid board. Now, so we've got our CPU, we've got our motherboard to put it in. Now, memory. So memory, 16 gigabytes for a budget gaming system, I think is still absolutely fine. The vast majority of games are still fine on 16 gigabytes. There's a few that could benefit from more. But also if you're heavily multitasking while gaming, if you want to have like 100 Chrome tabs open and stream a video or 3 while you're playing a game, then yeah, 16 gigabytes of RAM might not be the best choice. But for if we're just going to be playing a game, I still think 16 gigabytes is fine. We can get 2x8, and this motherboard would support an extra 2x8 in the future if you really wanted to. I'm going to sort price low to high here. And sorting low to high, okay, we can see the speed, and you also want to look at the cache latency. And generally, 3200 CL16 is fine. And I know that some of the more competitive gamer type people are going to say, that's not fine at all. Well, like I said, if you are CPU limited, not GPU limited, then the memory can matter more. But when you're GPU limited, which I think is going to be most people most of the time, unless you're chasing crazy esports frame rates, which some people are, and that's fine. I really think that RAM like this is honestly perfectly acceptable. It's, like I said, could be faster, but I think 3200 CL16 is going to be fine for most people, and that the extra money you could spend on faster RAM would make more sense putting into a better video card for most people's builds. Okay, so here we are with the basic platform. Like I said, you could slot in a CPU cooler. Now, the storage, so games these days can take a huge amount of storage space. Also, just don't get a hard drive. Unless you want backup storage of like massive amounts of terabytes of, video or huge libraries of games or something. But really, SSDs are not that much more expensive than hard drives to be worth the massive performance speed. So look at SSDs, and then I think that while you could get by with 500 gigabytes, that it makes more sense to go for at least a terabyte, and that you'll probably want to even go faster than that. Maybe even get a second one, I guess, in the future, depending on how many games you tend to keep installed, that kind of a thing. Now, there's SSDs that are a SATA interface, and then there's M.2 drives, which tend to be a lot faster, although occasionally you could get an M.2 drive that has a SATA interface and is actually fairly slow. And honestly, for gaming, you don't really need the fastest drive in the world. So like if I scroll up from the bottom here, we start getting to the M.2 drives. I'm pretty sure like this Team Group MP33 is reasonably fast. I don't know if it shows the speed here, but I think it's going to be fine for gaming, and the price is okay. So we're going to go ahead and slot that in. Now, you can certainly do better. Now, one thing I'm going to mention is that a lot of times you can buy a RAM and SSD combo. For example, I recently posted, I think this was yesterday as the time of filming, on my community page. I post a lot of deals I see on my community page. A combo from Team Force where you can get 16 gigabytes of faster memory. This is 3600 CL18, but then with a 1 terabyte PCIe Gen 4 SSD, which is significantly faster than the SSD that I'm putting in this build. And with this coupon code, it comes out to $126, whereas our memory and SSD combo here is coming out to less than that, but not by a huge amount. So I think it could make a lot of sense to grab a bundle like this, spend an extra $20 or so, and get a faster Gen 4 drive and a little bit better RAM. This RAM has like the RGB and stuff if you care about that. Anyway, let's go ahead and move on to the video card. This is the most important part of your gaming performance. So where do you want to go here? Well, we'll check current pricing, but NVIDIA's current options, like even the RTX 3050, tend to still be extremely overpriced. The RTX 3050 is usually still around $300. This is actually the first time I've seen it below $300, although it looks like this one is relying on a mail-in rebate, but it looks like you get it for $290 without that rebate. And yeah, so we're around the $285 to $300 range for the cheapest RTX 3050s. Also, I think even in current games, the RTX 3050, if you're playing a more demanding title like Cyberpunk 2077 or something like that, is already going to be having to turn down all the way to like medium settings, even at 1080p, in order to reach 60 FPS frame rates. Now, if you're willing to go with an older one, even from Nvidia, the RTX 2060 comes in down to around $230 right now for the cheapest models. And these are actually, believe it or not, faster than the RTX 3050 in most situations. They do draw more power, but they're actually a little bit faster than the RTX 3050. Has 2 gigabytes less VRAM. There is a 12 gigabyte model of the 2060, but the current pricing I'm seeing on that is a little bit over $300. So that's a big jump up in pricing to get that extra VRAM. So if you're willing to go with AMD, I really think that in this price range, you get a much better deal. The RX 6600 you can find for as low as $240, and then for other models you get like $250, $260 if you want a different cooler or something like that. This ASRock model for $240 is relying on a mail-in rebate, whereas this $250 Speedster Swift looks like it does not rely on a mail-in rebate. So I'm going to go ahead and lock that one in since it's not relying on a rebate. And I'm going to say that this RX 6600, I think, for just straight up gaming, unless you're just absolutely scared of not getting Nvidia, is giving you way more performance for your money. This thing is crushing the RTX 3050, and it's faster than the RTX 2060. And it's significantly cheaper than the 3050 and only slightly more expensive than the 2060. Now, AMD has a reputation for less stable drivers. You might get your games to crash a little bit more often. I have noticed that. I've used it AMD extensively myself, but it wasn't terrible for me. I think individual experience on this could vary. I do think my Nvidia GPU has been slightly more stable, fewer crashes, but AMD wasn't terrible for me. I've gone more into way more depth in this in other videos. But for live streaming, the NVIDIA encoder will look a little bit better at the low bit rates you're using for live streaming. So that is another thing to keep in mind. And then certain professional applications are programmed more specifically for NVIDIA acceleration. So depending on any professional applications that you might use, you might want to look into how well they support AMD. But for just straight up 1080p gaming, the value you're getting from this RX 6600 compared to the NVIDIA options is just a much better deal. And here's the other thing, coming back to the topic of, is right now a good time to build a gaming PC? Well, the RX 6600, we certainly could see its price come down. I wouldn't be shocked if it eventually came down closer to the $220, maybe even $200 mark, although that's asking quite a bit. It could happen. But the new GPUs that we're seeing coming out this year are going to be incredibly expensive. We might see an RTX 4070, and that might be $500 to $600 MSRP, and I would expect at least initially most models to sell for more than that. And we'll be seeing the 4080 and the 4090 significantly more expensive than that, meaning I don't think we're going to see a lot of price pressure on these lower mid-range GPUs. So that's where I don't think you're going to be able to buy something much better than this for this price anytime soon, nor will I think you'll be losing a huge, more than, $20 to $30 of value within the next, 4 or 5 months, I would think. Now, nobody can for sure predict the future. So that's why I think it still makes sense to build a build like this. Now, if you do have to go the NVIDIA route, I would recommend that RTX 2060 over the 3050 for the price to performance. And then if you want to spend more than this, you could watch one of my other videos recently, but the RX 6600 XT is significantly stronger, but its pricing has kind of come back up. They had gone as low as $300, but now I'm seeing them for $330, and I just don't think that extra money on the XT version is worth it now that it's back up to $330. That's not $100, that's like $80 more, right? That's a huge percentage increase in price. And it's about 15 to 20% more performance. So I don't think that's making sense right now. We'd also seen the 6650 XT for as low as $300, and now we're seeing those for around $320. So that's currently making more sense than the 66, non-50 version. This is even a few percent faster than the non-50 version. And then when you go the NVIDIA route, the RTX 3060 is your next jump up, but that's $370. And for the performance jump that you get for that, I really don't think it's very worthwhile. The TI version could start getting you into much higher refresh rate 1080p or even some pretty good 1440p gaming, but now we're talking $440. The AMD version, RX 6700 XT, is right around the $400 mark, and I will say that I think this could make sense if you want to start pushing this build into 1440p territory, because the performance you'll get here is very similar, slightly better than the 3060 Ti other than in ray tracing. You do get 12 gigabytes of memory. So I think this $400 price point would be personally my upper limit, because I think, like I said, by the end of the year, we could see a 4070 for around $500. So if you're going into that $500 to $600 price point, I think you're going to have buyer's remorse very soon, and we'll start seeing some push down of the value of the current $500 crop. So that's my thoughts on that. Maybe go up to that $400 price point, and if you were, I think that 6700 XT makes the most sense. But I think for pure bang for the buck and not losing value on buying it right now, the RX 6600 makes the most sense. All we have left are the case and the power supply. The only real effect a case will have on your build is it does need to fit your parts, and it can affect the cooling. And if your parts are running hot, they could thermal throttle, and you could lose a few percent of performance. You might hear noisy fans. But for the most part, it's more of an aesthetic choice on what it looks like. But like I said, the noise, things like that. So you could sort prices low to high. I'm going to go ahead and just grab something from the popular case list here that has a mesh front and at least one fan built in. The Fantex Eclipse P300A mesh for $70. I'm going to go ahead and throw this one in. I will mention, I think this only comes with one fan in the back. It has a mesh front, so that will pull a decent amount of air, but you could buy some extra fans to put in the front if you'd like. And this case is inexpensive, so you can probably afford to do that if you'd like to. But you might end up being surprised at how well this will stay cool, given the fact that some people who are going to criticize that case are thinking about their high-end builds. Guys, an RX 6600 draws like 100 watts, okay? And a 5600 is also very low watts. There's not a lot of heat in this build in the first place. So I don't think you're going to be too disappointed by the cooling situation. And like I said, you could throw in a CPU cooler for $20 or $30 here and avoid the stock one if you'd like. Now, the power supply needs to be good enough to run the build. Now, I'm going to be honest, this build we just threw together is very low power draw. So you could get by with something honestly pretty weak and inexpensive. So we could sort power supplies low to high, but one advantage to having a better power supply is being able to upgrade like your GPU in the future to something more powerful and with more power draw. Also, you don't want to buy something garbage that's just going to break. Now, 80 plus certifications aren't actually a quality rating, they're a efficiency rating. However, if the company does get this rating, there might be a little more effort put into the power supply. So you tend to screen out some of the complete junk. But I'd still then go for a recognizable brand that has a decent reputation and decent user reviews. For example, this EVGA GD 2019 for $55 is probably fine. Now, it's not modular, which basically means all those cords are always going to be there. Your build could be kind of cluttered, things like that. Whereas the modular designs, you can unplug the cords that you're not using and just plug in the ones that you need. This is 500 watts, which I think would be fine for this build. These parts are very low power, but it doesn't give you a lot of headroom to get something better in the future. It looks like if we look at the same GD model, we could get the 700 watt version for another $10. And I think that would be reasonable, and you could now support a big GPU upgrade in the future. However, this is still, not modular, things like that. So I'm just going to kind of check if anything, without going up too much more expensive, looks significantly better. We're seeing the EVGA Supernova GA, which I think is a slightly better quality, but we're getting fully modular now, but stepping back to 550 watts, which I think would be fine. So a lot of times there'll be different power supply deals available at different times. My understanding of the EVGA P2 here is that that's fairly high quality. This is 80 plus platinum. It's 650 watts and fully modular. and this is only $70. So by stepping up like $15 from this, absolutely, kind of, low end, it would work. It's not modular, it's still 80 plus gold, but it's only 500 watts. And stepping up to this P2 version, which is 80 plus platinum, so more efficient, 650 watts can support, honestly, on a good quality 650 watts, I can even run my RTX 3080, to be honest. Now, on a lower quality, but this seems pretty good, you can support a pretty beefy GPU upgrade. You're getting fully modular. I'm going to go ahead and throw this one in the build, but you could save some money on your power supply there, but don't go crazy saving money and buy some junk that will explode or something like that. So our whole build here is coming in for basically $775. If we don't count that rebate, $786. So we're under $800. I think you could definitely throw in a CPU cooler here and come in right around $800, and that could make perfect sense. You could also, like I said, step up to a RAM and SSD combo like this, get a little bit of an upgrade to both, and I think that would make a lot of sense. So if you want to spend just a little bit more money doing those things would make sense. Past that point, I think spending more on the video card would make the most sense, but like I said, jumping up to maybe that $400 range with the 6700 XT would get you a massive bump to performance, but you are going up another $160 on the build. But like I said, I think that could make a lot of sense. And if you wanted to see the build with that slotted in, and I think that the 6700 XT would be a fantastic 1080p GPU for a long time to come. It's going to be very high refresh rate 1080p, whereas the 6600 was more of a 60 FPS, although if you turn down settings and are playing competitive titles, you can certainly get some high refresh rates there. The 6700 XT is going to do great at 1080p for a long time, and gives you a reasonable 1440p option as well. You won't be maxing out everything at 1440p, but in many games you will be maxing them out, and other games maybe turning down to high, something like that. And we're still coming in under $1,000. Like I said, if you wanted to spend a little bit more there on the better RAM SSD combo and then an actual CPU cooler, maybe go up to 32 gigabytes of RAM, something like that, and you could still come in here right at around $1,000. And like I said, I don't think you're going to be losing crazy money here. In the future, the new line of CPUs, like the 7600X, is going to be $300. So it's really just not a price competitor in the same pricing class. And like I said, when you're GPU limited, you're not going to realize those performance benefits for that to be worthwhile. And like I said, the video card's coming out soon. I think we'll start putting pricing pressure on everything more expensive than this very soon. And so that might not make the most sense. Last thing I'll mention is you could look in the used market right now at GPUs. And especially as there's the move to proof of stake on Ethereum coming very, very soon, you might start to see some really good used market deals, but that comes with its own host of issues, whether you're willing to do that. And any last thoughts? I guess don't take this as me saying don't buy a high-end PC right now. You certainly can. Just realize that that's where you're more likely to get that buyer's remorse and see a big value loss to your build, or get something much better soon if you went ahead and did that. All right, I've been rambling on a really long time, so let's just go ahead and end the video. I hope all of you have an excellent day.